Hi everyone, thank you for joining us at this REC at Home Talking Recruitment webinar. We've got the cameras on today, so welcome to my office at home. I did have the pleasure of being at the REC's offices in London for several days over the last month because we are open, but the Prime Minister's put a kibosh on some of that earlier in the week. I'm delighted to be joined today by our Head of Policy, Sophie Wingfield. Sophie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And lots to talk about. I'm delighted to say that I did manage to get the REC's response to Rishi Sunak signed off before we started. So that work is done, and the views of the recruiters we've been talking to about some of the things that he was announcing will be out there in the media. Let's, if we just move the slide on. Just to confirm that we are who we say we are, this is our own commitment to digital right to work checking. And if we move the slide on again, please. So our theme for today, quite a lot to cover in the political, COVID-y, Brexit-y world. So we'll give you the headlines of that. Before we start, we'll do a bit of the latest marketing, the latest market intelligence that we're seeing. And then we'll finish off on some of the things we're doing at the REC you might like to know about and get involved in. So if we begin, move the slide on again, please. Talking a little bit about UK labour market conditions, what we're seeing, and if we move the slide on. So this is our latest data from Report on Jobs. We've got a new report on jobs coming out next week, so this will be updated. And as you can see quite clearly, a substantial bounce back in what people are reporting in terms of trends. Really important to remember that in Report on Jobs, we're asking recruiters about their experience last month and the month before. So you would expect this substantial bounce back because we're actually comparing against the lockdown. So while this is definitely a V in terms of market going down to market gently coming back, it's certainly not a full recovery, and we'll be interested in the chat and on questions to hear from you on what you're seeing. Somewhat unsurprisingly, our staff availability index has also gone up quite significantly as people, as the furlough scheme winds down, and as people both begin looking for new jobs. Perhaps they weren't looking during the full lockdown, but also because you're getting those redundancies starting to come through from some sectors. I think, Sophie, we've definitely seen a trend though of perm much stronger than temp much stronger than perm across the whole country.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. Not only has it been sort of temp, which often it happens during the recovery of a recession, but also it's in key sectors. So things like logistics and construction and health and social care have all seen more of a kind of a return, a bounce than other sectors, such as the more white collar sectors.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely true. Our responses from members are very clear that white collar office work hasn't recovered anywhere near the kind of amount that we've seen in places where people are still going to work by and large, whether that's construction or healthcare, and areas where we know businesses are investing significantly at areas like IT. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So this is drawn from Jobs Outlook, which is our survey of clients. And as you can see, clients are generally more confident about their own business than about the economy more broadly. In fact, the economic outlook numbers have been pretty negative for quite some time, and I think that's about all of the uncertainty that we're having in the economy even before COVID. Big dip in that with the lockdown, started to come back in the last set of data that we had. But more importantly, I think the area where people tend to be more positive is hiring for their own firm, and that's coming back much more to positive territory. So again, we've seen short-term hiring intentions improve. We've also seen agency worker intentions improve, and I would anticipate when we see the next set of this data, in line with what Sophie was saying a minute ago, that the appetite for temporary work will increase over the next few months. As the HRD of one FTSE 100 company said to me recently, the demand that I've got right now is actually fine, Neil, but my challenge is that I have a significant problem with the fact that I can't see 2, 3, 4, 5 months out, and the events on the virus this week emphasize that. So overall, we think this is a picture of a market that took a significant fall. We talked before on this about the sort of average 80% fall in perm volumes, and about 40 to 50% fall in temp volumes across the membership at the height of lockdown, which has been gently recovering through June and July and August. And if we move the slide on, that's certainly what we've seen in job adverts, and we started measuring job adverts as the economy started to open up. As you can see here, our last report was for the last week of August, and there were about 1.12 million job adverts. That's up quite significantly from the end of lockdown. There are some specifics on the slide about areas and about particular roles. All of that stacks up everything we've been saying on the from the other surveys. I think from our point of view, there will be interesting to see what happens now. We have this data coming out again tomorrow. I think this trend has largely been confirmed through to the middle of September by that data. Look out for that in the morning. But importantly, this week is a moment of inflection, and I think really important when the Chancellor opened his statement an hour ago that he talked about cautious optimism, because I think consumer confidence is going to be a critical driver of whether these trends continue or whether we see a renewed slowdown. Could we move the slide on, please? So Sophie, do you want to introduce our first poll?
Yeah, so in light of the jobs data, how confident are you in your business recovering by the end of next spring? So very confident, a little bit confident, or not confident at all. So the poll is now open. So if we'll just leave it open for a couple of minutes, and we also do have the questions open as well. So if you have questions or comments about any of our data, it would be great to send that through. We'll be keeping an eye on those questions as well. So if we just keep the poll open a little bit longer to allow you to vote. And I think we can close it there. Thanks, Tammy. So I think that reflects some of our data. So 62% say that they are a little bit confident that by next spring things will be looking better. And it's good to see that 25% are very confident that things will be recovering by the next spring.
I think that's really really good to see, actually. I think given the news flow this week, that sense that the discussions that you're having tend to being still a bit more confident than not confident, I think is really helpful. It's a super guide for us in terms of framing how we talk about the industry with external parties. The first thing I discuss with any minister, and we've seen 5 or 6 different ministers in the last few weeks, is what are members saying, how are members feeling, and this kind of data is super important to us in talking about that. Let's go back to the slide pack and on to the next slide. So we've entitled this Policy and Campaigns Update, but I think it starts as What's Rishi Just Said Update. And if we click on to the next slide, please. So I think before we get into the details of today, it's probably worth setting out the bigger picture of what we're seeing here. Sophie, your team's identified 4 big themes here. What would you note about them and the impact they're likely to have?
So obviously we've seen this week the massive impact that the rising infection rate has had, and you know, we've had Rishi Sunak giving an update today on what the measures are that will go hand in hand with some of those kind of changes that the Prime Minister announced on Tuesday. I think there are still levers that the government can pull, so I guess it will depend on what happens with that infection rate going forward. And I guess it will also have an impact on the unemployment rate. So we've got the CJRS ending this October, at the end of October, but we've got the new scheme as announced today. So we'll be looking closely at the unemployment rates. But, you know, again, there are levers that the government can pull, but also the recruitment industry to help get people back into work. The schools, keeping the schools open seems to be a real priority for the government at the moment, but obviously, and it has massive benefit to the economy and people being able to work. So we'll keep, again, it all, you know, is the uncertainty of the virus at this time. And at the same time as all of this, we have the Brexit and trade talks at critical points, which we'll discuss later on.
Fantastic. And I think, you know, we wanted to be really upfront with you about, you know, the priorities that we see on today's webinar, and we've stuck these on this slide as well. The most important thing that we've done at the REC since March is, first and foremost, we have to get the support to you that you need. That's about access to government schemes, it's about advice. Issues like sick pay, which wasn't mentioned today, but we know that practical issues like standoffs with clients over coverage for statutory sick pay, where we're pushing for government to do more, and they did the £500 payment earlier in the week for self-isolation, but there's more to do to make sure that we're not putting gum in the system between clients and agencies on who covers sick pay, right to work checks, keeping that digital move that we achieved earlier in the year, and a whole stream of other really practical things that are right at the heart of what we're doing. So keep talking to us about the things that are causing you issues. That's an important part of what we're doing. Secondly, you know, really pushing on the performance of the labour market. So how do we lift confidence to hire amongst client businesses, and talking about the package of things that are needed to do that. And we're going to talk a bit about Rishi's announcement today, but from my perspective, I think I'd have liked to have seen more on the new jobs that we're going to need to create, rather than just on the maintenance of jobs that we have. Clearly getting the government to work with us, and it was great to hear Mims Davis, the Employment Minister, recently acknowledge that there's no jobs recovery without the recruitment industry, in a roundtable with members, but we need to make those warm words mean something. So getting those schemes working, we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then a whole stream of things, as you'd expect, about regulation and the new immigration rules, and of course that dangerous B word, Brexit, which we'll need to come back to. Could we move the slide on, please? So we picked out a few things here, and one of the aspects of this that I updated very early this morning, based on a bit of inside info from the Department for Business, is that the employment bill we were all expecting, I've moved back from the autumn into the spring, because that's pretty clear where we are. We've of course had the Chancellor's statement today, but we're not getting a budget this autumn. We're highly unlikely to get anything other than a one-year spending review for government. So a lot of that deep work government's planning won't happen. Sophie, what are the highlights here that you would draw out for members that are likely to be real drivers of interest practically?
I think it's interesting because in any normal year we'd probably be talking a lot about the party conference season. I don't think we will be in this webinar. I think the real key moments to look out for are the new immigration rules, which will be probably published after the immigration bill, and that stops freedom of movement from the end of this year. So that 31st of December, and that will and how that affects right to work next year. So I think that will be something we will obviously keep members really updated with, along with Brexit in the coming months. So I think that October 15th, which is the UK's own deadline to sort of decide whether we've got a trade deal or not, will be a key moment as well.
Fantastic, and I've put in a couple of pieces here. There was a lot of furore about the minimum wage recently, and whether the April increase goes ahead. There's a decision to be made about that in October and into November. And I want to particularly draw out under autumn the note about the REC's campaign on the role of the industry. We've just kicked off some work with partners. We're going to do several things as part of this, and we really like your support for it. Firstly, we're going to revisit how we measure the scale and impact of the sector, both in terms of how the sector is changing at a moment like this, and that will be an important source of information, obviously for us and for our work, but for all of you. But we're also going to do some deeper work on what the industry contributes, because I think it's really important to make the case externally about how the industry, as we say at the REC, makes great work happen in terms of opportunity and in terms of economic growth for Britain. So we expect to see some pretty hefty stuff coming out from us, but importantly, not just big numbers. We want to tell stories about how the industry has changed lives and changed companies. And we will come back to you over the course of the next few months with work that we are doing and looking for great examples and case studies. As always, if you've got a story you want to tell, just get in touch with us and tell us about it, because I think there's a big job of work for us to do to demonstrate what we know to be true, and that is that the industry is going to be incredibly relevant to building the new economy that we're going to have post-COVID. Could we move on to the next slide, please? Now, Sophie, I think you've got the questions today. So as we go, if you want to shout any out that we should cover, please do so. This is the holding slide that was drafted last night because we knew the Chancellor would stand up and say something. We didn't know what it was, hence the ... after the REC's first reaction. You'll notice, by the way, that everything is now that the Treasury does is now personally signed by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, as you can see on the slide here. That, of course, is in no way connected to his positioning himself as a potential future leader of the Conservative Party, and I shouldn't be so cynical about that. So the announcement that we had earlier on, I think, has lots of things to like, and it has a few gaps. So broadly, things to like: importantly, cash flow support. So if you have taken a loan or government bounce back, CBILS loan or a government bounce back loan, there will be more support for time to pay and at lower interest. If, like many businesses, you deferred your second quarter VAT bill, you will now not have to pay that as a lump sum in Q2 next year. You'll be able to spread it over 11 payments. So there's a whole slew of things there that are about easing the cash flow pressure on businesses and also maintaining employment. So the self-employed support scheme has been extended, and the new job support scheme will replace the furlough scheme. Now, both of those are objectively less generous than what went before. In particular, the job support scheme, you will be paying more salary to someone you keep on than you get in terms of time worked. So it's really been designed to maintain employment in sectors which are suffering a cyclical decline, rather than to stop all redundancies. I think it's really important to look into the detail of the scheme as it comes out this afternoon on that. Couple of areas where I think the Chancellor could have done a little bit more. Still nothing on directors as owner-operators of companies. It's a big gap, and I think the Chancellor's defence line on that about the tax structure for directors in normal times, perhaps he felt it had some justification in a 3-month crisis. I think we all know it has no justification in a 1 year or more crisis, and we know that owner-operating directors are going to be the drivers of the economy at local level and the bounce back we're going to see. So the REC's called that out in our response this afternoon. We've also pointed to the lack of action, as I said earlier, on new jobs. So we pushed, as you can see here, on cutting NI and on flexible skills funding. There was very little future focused commentary today. We continue to discuss those with government, and there is a great deal of interest in how government can use things like the National Skills Fund flexibly to support training. The NI point is one that we will return to. So broadly, I think there are some good announcements today from the Chancellor. They will benefit many recruitment businesses and your clients across the economy, in particular if you're servicing hard-hit sectors like hospitality, where the VAT scheme has been extended. But I think it's important to acknowledge there are also some gaps, and the schemes are an order less generous than what we saw in March. So do make sure you get through the REC briefing on everything when it comes out over the next day or two before you make some decisions about what this means for your business. Sophie, anything I've missed there that you picked up listening to the Chancellor?
No, I think you've covered everything. We've had some questions on the question function. Someone can't see all of it, so someone's asking about data on engineering and manufacturing, and I think we've got a blog going out on that tomorrow with some but we can send you the briefing that we did for the last week's blue collar webinar as well, which goes into those sectors in a bit more detail.
In general, that engineering manufacturing a bit more positive than average.
We've also got an interesting point here, which is given the widespread implementation of work from home, options for office-based staff, do you think that employers will now look at location agnostic recruitment where possible, and as a result, could national salary levels begin to equalise?
So I think this is a fascinating point. I'm going to plug the guide from REC 2020 later on, but we've put all the best lessons from REC 2020 to guide on our website, and there's a fantastic bit in the panel with Mark Essex from KPMG, where he points out essentially that if you have to be in the office in a mixed model, and I think we all think ultimately we'll end up with some kind of mixed model, the commuting range for London is much larger. Cardiff is in London's commuter belt if you only have to go to the office 2 or 3 days a week, as is Newcastle upon Tyne, and I think that will have some quite significant effects, as will the decision about whether jobs can be done here in the UK or abroad. So I do think that kind of the days of the London waiting, to use a very public sector term, but that sense of London's an elevated wage for working in London will probably dissipate a bit, because I think longer commutes, once things normalise, will be acceptable to people. But I really do recommend that that session on the REC 2020 guide, because I thought Mark had some really interesting thoughts on exactly that. And I do think there are big changes coming. I suspect that one of the big challenges clients will have is making sure they do proper workforce planning about when they need the workforce together and when they need them separate. I can see FDs all over the country with pound signs in their eyes thinking, I don't need an office anymore, and that's a heck of an overhead. I think if you're running a business and you're interested in corporate culture, in staff development, in innovation, you do need some co-working space. It might be a bit different. And that whole element of workforce planning, which is an area where if we can get to that trusted advisor space as recruiters, we can add great value. I think that's a huge issue. I was talking recently to one HRD, and she said to me, I've been asked to come up with a mixed model guidance for the company. And at first I thought this was going to be easy. And when I opened the box, more and more and more things come out of it about mental health, about people's ability, different people's ability to work at home. It's great if you're sitting here like me. There's a garden just down there, and there's and I've got a desk here. I've talked to someone who was working on their mum's ironing board recently because mum had the dining room table and dad had the only desk in the house. So we do need to remember that there's a mixed model coming. I think a real opportunity to talk to clients about what their plans are and help them with some workforce planning. Shall we move on to the next slide? So here's an initial take. If you did watch it earlier, we're just interested in what your initial thoughts are on the announcements Rishi made today. It will just help us think about how we answer questions in the media over the next 24 hours. So why don't we launch that poll now, please? And Sophie, while the poll's open, I think a bit of a challenge not to have a budget between now and the end of the year. So if we're thinking about things that have been confirmed, there's not a lot of scope for the Chancellor to pass a finance bill that that changes anything about taxation for the industry between now and April the 5th. So I think we can probably regard most of what's in law now as set to come in.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we're probably in a space where it will be maybe another mini budget, depending on how the economy fares over the next few months. Because I mean, we certainly weren't expecting one this week. I don't think last week.
Yeah, I think it's a real sign of how tied the public health and the economic policy are, that once we've made changes on public health policy, we had to do something on the economy this week. Let's close that poll off now and see how people are feeling. Well, I think the yellow is definitely sort of the gut reaction of the REC team, which is we're digging through the Treasury documents as we speak. I think on balance, Sophie, the poll results here back up the kind of call we had at virtual REC Towers after listening to the Chancellor. I think there are some positives that might help, but there are some gaps.
Yeah, definitely. I think on the schemes, the new schemes announced, it's always about looking at the detail. We've seen that before with the CJRS and the positives and the where there's been sort of further questions that we've had to take forward. So yeah, we'll definitely be letting members know the detail as soon as it's available for us.
Yeah, so keep an eye on your REC website and your REC emails later in the week for all of that. Let's go back to the slides, please, and go on to the next one. So we're now just going to run through just the very headlines of one or two things that we're up to that you might like to know. There's a lot of detail on these slides, and that's so that you have it to take away. But Sophie will just give you a couple of lines on each of some of the big COVID relevant issues that we're dealing with. Over to you, Sophie.
Yeah, so statutory sick pay, we know that there are lots of changes, and there have been lots of changes since March this year to who is eligible for statutory sick pay. We're continuing to raise this with government, so the impact on the recruitment industry specifically and the challenges it poses in terms of for client relationships, and also compliance of workers to isolate. So we've had one announcement last week, I think it was over the weekend, that there is an additional £500 payment to low paid workers who've been asked to self-isolate. For full details of this are still coming out, but in conversations with BEIS, it has been confirmed that it will be available for agency workers, but we will update members as soon as we have any further details. This will be a grant for a worker to claim from, I think, the local authority, but as I say, we're awaiting further details. Next slide, please, Temi. So this is just a reminder that there is a, following the Finance Act back in June or July this year, there were measures to claw back money from the CJRS scheme included in this. So it's just a reminder that if there are any circumstances that have changed and you do think that there may have been an overpayment made to you on the CJRS scheme, there is a limited time in which you can pay that back before the government will claim it back. And if you don't pay it back in that time, so it's now 90 days, the law treats it as a failure, as a deliberate failure. We responded to the consultation earlier in the year and kind of raised our concerns about the members, the grey areas in terms of CJRS for our members, in particular on furloughing temporary workers. We're pleased that there was included initially they'd said that this would have to be paid back in 30 days, but it has been extended to 90 days, which was also part of the our position on the consultation.
Just on this, I was chatting to Ben Bruton, who's the head of the Employment Agency Standards Inspectorate last week on this. A couple of things that I think he'd want to pass on this. One is, there are egregious examples of fraud under CJRS where people aren't real workers, or where they have actually been working when they shouldn't have been. Those are HMRC's priorities. The focus here is just make sure you've got your paperwork done, make sure you've got your records in the right place. If you have, then it's likely that you'll be able to defend yourself on all of this. And if you do find something untoward, then put up your hand and pay it back. Lots of businesses have. And by and large, our experience is that HMRC's focus is on those more egregious cases of fraud.
Yeah, we've had that in confirmation from ministers on our webinars as well. So it is, but we've been pressing for the government to say something in writing. But I think they are definitely looking at those instances of fraud. Next slide, please, Temi. So this is the job finding support service as announced by the Chancellor in his summer statement back in July. We've been working closely with DWP, and on Monday the government released the specification for the service. So the contract will be procured on open market competition, and I think it's currently in the clarification phase, so please do raise any questions with government. If you're interested, we can provide you with more details of where to find the information on how to bid. I think bidding needs to be done by the 12th of October. And then the timetable, as the government have set out, will be that they'll name a successful bidders from November, and the scheme itself will go live in January, and it will run for approximately a year. So I think if you are interested, please do get in touch with the policy team and we can send you more information. Next slide, please, Temi. I noticed we've had quite a few questions on the on our questions about Kickstart and when it is starting. So the government has launched the £2 billion Kickstart scheme earlier this month. It will start in November. So we're planning to be an intermediary for the recruitment businesses who want to offer a Kickstart placement but can't meet the threshold. So the threshold is 30 job placements. So we are, please do get in touch if you're interested in having a Kickstart placement in your business, and we'll bid for this soon. So we'll keep you up to date with this.
I think I want one of the Chancellor's Natty Kickstart scheme hoodies, but I'm not going to wear it until the thing is launched and it's a bit simpler. And I think there's a big message, isn't there, Sophie, in terms of Kickstart, where we've seen lots of members be very keen and the process be very complex. And on the previous slide, you were talking about the private sector job search support, where there's a whole array of different potential contracts. And we were talking on a call with the government this morning about making sure that this is simple for the industry to get involved in. And we think that's a big role for the REC, but also getting some pressure onto government to make it easier and for firms to get on board with. We appreciate how difficult some members have been finding the kind of government bureaucracy that sits around these schemes.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there are obviously a lot of schemes announced all at once, and a lot of them we're still waiting for detail, and that causes confusion when we don't have that detail. So yeah, I think that's right. Next slide, please, Tammy. So we have also, the BEIS has launched a scheme with Enterprise Nation, and this is about access for business advice. It's for SMEs, so we've got a code for REC members, so you can sign up as either an advisor to pledge to give some of your time to give your recruitment expertise to SMEs, or alternatively you can sign up as an SME and access the advice through Enterprise Nation, and that's advice on legal, accountancy, advertising, marketing. It's open until the end of the year, so I would encourage you to contact the policy team for the REC code and get involved.
Yeah, a really good opportunity as well, of course, to meet some small businesses in your local area who are looking for advice.
Next slide, please, Tammy.
The grimly inevitable arrival of Brexit. So let's take a brief detour from COVID, and I think really important to do so because the transition period ends on January the 1st, and you will have seen over the last few weeks that things are ramping up for the potential of a no deal. I mean, personally, I am an optimist. I think there will be a deal, but I fear it will be at the last possible moment. And because of that, I think there will be some short-term disruption because businesses will have to prepare for no deal such as they can. I know many businesses, many members of the REC, but many client businesses that I've talked to have spent the cash that was available for no deal prep on dealing with COVID. So there's a real challenge there in the short term. But I do think I'm still basically optimistic that there'll be at least a thin deal, and a thin deal matters because then everyone's still at the table and we can build on it. If there's no deal, that's much more problematic because we will have a period of everyone sulking and not talking to each other before things warm up again. And you'll have seen some of the more ridiculous elements of where we are in the press over the last 24 hours, because spent last week talking about the customs border in the Irish Sea, there's now we now also have to get used to a customs border on the Kent border and one around Gibraltar. So there's a lot to get right over the next few months, and hopefully we can get some form of deal in place. But really important at this stage to remember to revisit your no deal plans. It affects all businesses because things like data handling, as well as any cross-border business that you do, immigration processes, there's an awful lot to make sure you've got in position. Do visit the Brexit Hub on the REC website to do that. Refresh your conversations with clients on how they're handling it, and different sectors will have different impacts. and importantly work with us on trade. And we talk increasingly about trade rather than Brexit at the REC, because there's a deal to do with Europe and one to do with the US, but there's also a deal to do with many countries in Africa, India, with China. Importantly there, there's two types of trade deal. There's kind of what's known as water deals, which is about helping countries that trade pretty efficiently trade a bit more efficiently, and the obvious example of that would be the UK and the US. But there's also, and apologies for the gruesome terminology, this is just how trade negotiators speak, what we call blood deals, which are about opening up markets that haven't previously been open. And I think there's a lot of work to do there, and a big focus for the government going forward in terms of being able to supply services into different parts of the world. We're doing a little survey at the moment on trade and its impact on the sector. Recruitment is a big export sector for the UK. The link's here. If you can find time to pop on and give us some views, that'd be really helpful. Timmy, can we move the slide on? So Sophie, the one other big thing, of course, that changes Jan 1 is the immigration system. So I know we've done some recent work to help members on that. Do you want to update us on that?
Yeah, and just one thing on trade as well. If there are members who work across borders in the EU or in other countries, BEIS are always asking us for examples, and they're happy to do interviews with members. So they want to know how the system works at the moment for recruiters, and it can feed into our work with the trade technical group as well, which we sit on. So that's just a kind of plea to get in touch if you think that would be of interest. They're looking at a lot of different countries, as Neil mentioned. In terms of immigration, so we are expecting the rules to be updated soon. So we're expecting first the MAC response. So this is a response to the consultation earlier in the year on the shortage occupation list. The consultation was in June, so a strange time to be sort of talking about the shortage occupation lists. But we have heard from members that they do feel that in certain areas there were the end of the year cut-off for freedom of movement from the EU will have a real impact. So we're expecting the new rules to be at some point in autumn published, and we'll go through these as soon as we have them. We've done some work with Fragaman, and we have a guide on what it can be expected from these new rules. At the moment, there's no low-skilled rules, but I think in terms of our message, we want clear rules that are flexible and adapt to the changing economy. And we know from other countries that have point-based systems, the point-based system does evolve over time, and we'll need to make sure that we have a system that adapts to the changing economy as we see changes in the next few years. But I think our kind of key aim at the moment is to get that clarity from members as soon as possible and make sure we know exactly what members need to do to implement them in January.
I think that's absolutely right, and we know how challenging introducing a system with so little detail on the rules is now. It's a point we have made repeatedly to the Home Office, and will continue to do so. I think Sophie's point about rules in points-based systems is absolutely right. If you look at Australia and also the experience of the US system, what you tend to do on introduction, when systems are introduced, they're always done with an eye on managing the negative aspects that politicians perceive of immigration. You tend to win the war in the changes that are made to the scheme after it's introduced, and we are not going to regard January 1 as a final point on this for us. We'll stay close to the Home Office and keep making the arguments, I think particularly about some of those shortage sectors that are not currently covered, thinking back to the fact that a lot of, for instance, the food supply industry in the UK has only been kept going in the last 6 months by a lot of workers who've come from countries elsewhere in Europe. So there's a lot still to do on this, and we'll keep at it. Can we move the slides on, please, Timmy? Sophie, this has been a big area of activity for the policy team, disguised REM, and probably want to raise people's raise on people's risk register in terms of the level of interest we're getting from HMRC?
Yeah, so the HMRC are currently consulting on disguised remuneration schemes and how they can be tackled with the view to announcing policies. So they haven't sort of proposed any specific reforms, but they are kind of looking quite carefully at this. The consultation ends next week, so we'll be submitting in the REC response. But we've had discussions with HMRC in our employment policy committee with members, and we're sort of crafting the response at the moment. It's an opportunity for us to once again push for a clear legal definition of the umbrella companies. Although we know this is going to be part of the government's employment bill next year. Obviously, everything's it will now be in the spring, so when that legislation actually comes in, will likely be a year minimum. But we'd be really happy to hear from members as well about any ideas that they think would be able to help in sort of tackling non-compliance in supply chains. We've put some ideas here. We think that there should be greater intelligence sharing by HMRC, an information campaign on tax avoidance scheme, and also just a quicker response from the HMRC in terms of these new and emerging schemes, because sometimes it takes them quite a few years to respond to whether a scheme is compliant or not.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think it's part of the theme, isn't it, this of government trying to understand a lot of how these things work, so getting umbrella regulation right. Also thinking about the scope and impact of the conduct regs. There's a really interesting judgment earlier in the week from the Court of Appeal, which implies that a lot of these platform-based businesses that like to claim that they're not employment agencies actually are employment agencies, which of course is good news. And in this moment, I think there's a real opportunity for REC members to demonstrate their professionalism and to demonstrate their role as trusted advisors for clients, and actually for the REC to emphasize how important that is in all of our work. And our position on umbrella company regulation, for instance, is part of that, in terms of making sure there's real clarity for people, both clients and candidates, about the way the system works. If we move on to the next slide. We've put a couple of slides in here just to bring some things to your attention. Firstly, there's an awful lot of work going on at the moment in terms of making sure that framework that we're in touch with the frameworks. We've done some work with freedom of information recently with the health frameworks in England, just to make sure that we have the right information to challenge some of the behaviour of framework providers. But there are a few here that are worth being on your radar if you are if they're relevant to your business, and Neil on the team here at the REC will be happy to pick up on any questions that you have. On to the next slide. And this is just a summary of maybe some of the other things you might have wanted to pick up on. I think right to what we've mentioned, IR35, lots going on to prepare. I think really important to make sure that you have your house in order on that. As we said earlier, there's very little chance of a change now from private sector implementation next April. The REC team here to help you with that, but making sure that whichever sector you're in, you can demonstrate that you've done the work to make the determination, and not just relying on clients as well, because of course the liability is pretty challenging on that when it comes in. And then the next slide. And I just wanted to emphasize that is a particularly terrible photograph of me. That we're getting the message out in every way we can. So this is just a little set of examples of some of the coverage we've had recently. I mentioned the FOI request on spiralling NHS staffing banks, and the fact that banks are now typically costing more than agency in the NHS. but a whole range of other coverage there, just to show that as well as leaning into government, we're also doing our best to get the REC out there in terms of the media. And the next slide. And this is our last poll for today, so we'll go live with it now, and really just a sense of what's keeping you awake at night. Where should we be focusing? And Sophie, while we're doing that, are there any questions that we should pick up?
I'm just trying to find the questions. There are a couple that are kind of are saying that actually the VAT change today is actually a real help for cash flow for members. So I think that is something that we kind of thought would probably be the case.
Yeah, I as the chief executive of the REC, I understand that entirely, given that all of the VAT on all of the membership subscriptions goes in Q2, and so I'm delighted to be able to keep some money in the business to serve recruiters rather than giving it to Rishi.
There are a couple of questions on Kickstart, which we'll come back to people individually. I think there's some specific detail that we don't have at the moment, so we will of course update members as soon as we have that detail. But please do kind of keep your questions coming in.
Fantastic. Let's close that poll there and see where we are. Well, I don't think either of us will be surprised by that result, Sophie, and certainly the good news is that if we put a 1, 2, 3, 4 on how the REC is prioritising things at the moment, that's largely how we would put it. I think we've been very clear in our response to Rishi today that a second full lockdown isn't an acceptable option, and we need to avoid it. I think some of that's about business speaking up on the importance of getting the testing system right. It's something that I've been working with the CBI and other sector federations to pick up on. Interesting though to see Brexit ahead of IR35 and regulation reform, which is certainly a kind of about the impact that no deal will have, given how close the decision point is now. Let's go back to the slides and on to the next one. So I'd just like to walk you through, as we close out the webinar, some news from the REC, just to make sure some things are on your radar that you might find helpful. So Temi, roll on to the next slide, please. So first and foremost, I mentioned this earlier, we had a great online conference earlier in the month on the 8th of September. We've packaged up the best of it online at on the REC website. The address is here. 35 different contributors from the industry, all sorts of issues covered. Well worth a look in terms of thinking about leadership, business change, and some of the issues we face right now. All available online for you. It's a great advantage of doing an online conference. So do have a look at that. And obviously, as REC members, you can just log straight in. On to the next slide. And likewise, do also have a look at our weekly podcasts, some really interesting recent episodes. James Reed on leadership last week, Emma Agumang of the FT on IR35, a wide range of content there, talking about international recruitment business with Kevin Freegard of Gattaca this week. So lots there, and again, free to access via the REC website. On the next slide, please. Today is the first day that the REC has done fully online examinations, and we hope that it's all going to go well. I haven't had the report yet, but the team were set up for it all earlier this morning. That means that we can now make sure that everyone who books an examination gets an examination. They can take it at home. There's individualized invigilation, which is a bit Big Brother-ish, but it's only for the length of the exam. Someone actually watches you through your webcam and can see what you've got open on your computer while you're doing the exam. So it's a really good way of making sure that people can still take their calls while we're all working from home, and can find a peaceful space to do it. So I think it's a good move. And as Mark Essex said at our recent REC conference, once you discover things, you can't uninvent them. This is one that I think will stick around for the long haul. So no more drafty exam halls. People can take their exams in quiet rooms at offices or at home, which is good news in terms of making sure REC qualifications are available for people. On to the next slide. Just picking that up, there are a wide range of our courses available now. Do talk to your account manager if you would like to sign up yourself or colleagues for any of these qualifications. Regular exam dates through the next year. After all, really supporting what is becoming a professional service means supporting the professionalisation of our people, and the REC qualifications are well established and properly regulated by Ofqual. And because we do our exams online, we haven't had to invent an algorithm, which is good news. On to the next slide, please. And we're also still running our usual program of training. As you can see, some dates here. Everything delivered online and 25% off at the moment for members. So do take a look at that if you're thinking about how you bring people on. And on to the next slide. And a wide range of online events as well. So all of this is here for you to have a look at afterwards, and when the slides are available for you. And if there's anything you see that you want to sign up to, go ahead. If there are things you'd like us to do that you're not seeing, get in touch. I'm always happy to hear, as is your account manager. And on to the next slide. Just making sure that we're absolutely clear here on IR35. There is a program of IR35 events to help you and your team get ready. So visit the hub for all of our member support, but there are also a range of events available for you. And on to the next slide. Now, this is where things get a bit complex, but they don't get complex because the new REC website is so easy. I just wanted to emphasize that we're doing more and more through the member portal on the REC website. And that's where you can go to set your preferences for what you hear from us, but also to update your contacts and when we get into next year, take the compliance test. So do log in if you haven't yet. Have a look around. You can always get support from our customer engagement team. There are a few links to videos in the slide pack that will help you pick up on that. And on to the next slide, please. And one of the things you can do there is making sure you're using the correct REC logo in your communications. You can pull all of that from the website, and they're really important in terms of demonstrating the membership that you have. We want you to be proud of being REC members, and this is this has a whole range of tools that you can just plug and play into emails and into letterheads and so forth. It's all available for you online. And on to the next slide. And importantly, we'll be able to run renewals online next year. We are currently working out how we can support you next year, knowing that we want to maintain what we're doing, but we also don't want to increase subscriptions. And we're having a discussion with the REC board now about how we do that. But one of the ways you can help yourself in terms of making sure you get everything you need from the REC, and we make sure that we have a really smooth experience in talking to you about what you want from the REC, is if you go online, please do update your contact information, make sure your branch information is correct, and have a look at setting your comms preferences. On to the next slide. Just one further piece here about the Good Recruitment Collective. This is a really important tool. We have over 500 businesses employing over 3 million people working with the REC through the Good Recruitment Collective on standards and how to buy recruitment well. Your clients can get a lot from it, but also it's a way that we can articulate why people should be using REC members. It's really taken off. And if you'd like to know more, just get in touch with me or with Kuba, our head of the GRC. There's lots of online advice that GRC members can access that will help them to understand why you want to have more of that trusted advisor discussion. And on to the next slide, please, Temi. And that's it for today. Thank you all for joining us. Sophie, are you going to reappear?
Yes, I will. And I've just noticed that we've had quite a few asks for the slides, so we will be sending them out after this.
As always, we put more information than we talk about on the slides because it's really important to make sure you have everything you need. Talk to your REC account manager, give us a call at the customer engagement team, drop me or Sophie an email with anything you want to feedback on. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.